book is called Presidential Pets by Laura Driscoll. Wild Pets of the Past. The White House hadn't been built when George Washington became the first president, but he did have a stable full of horses and a kennel full of hounds. Nearly 12 horses and 40 dogs. Washington used the horses and hounds to hunt foxes, so there's nothing too wild about the very first presidential pets, except some of the dogs' names: Sweet Lips, True Love, and Madam Moose. President Warren Harding was very fond of a squirrel named Pete. Pete lived on the White House grounds. When people came to the White House for a meeting, they often brought Pete a few nuts. Some unusual White House pets had special jobs. President William Taft liked fresh milk, so he kept his own cow, Pauline Wayne, on the White House lawn. Each day, Pauline's milk was on the president's table. When President Woodrow Wilson looked out the windows of the White House, he'd see his flock of sheep grazing on the lawn. At the time, the United States was at war, so people were living simply and saving money. The sheep nibbled on the grass, so the lawn didn't have to be cut. They provided mountains of wool, too. President Benjamin Harrison had a pet goat named Old Whiskers. The goat was often hitched to a cart and pulled the Harrison grandchildren around the White House grounds. One day, the goat was pulling the president's young grandson around the lawn. All of a sudden, the goat dashed through an open gate and took off down the street. President Harrison saw what happened and chased after the goat, waving his cane and shouting all the way. Luckily, the president ran fast enough to catch up with the runaway animal. Most people try to get rid of mice in their houses. Not President Andrew Johnson. One summer, he discovered a family of mice living in his bedroom. The president didn't want them to go hungry, so instead of shooing them out, Johnson left out handfuls of flour and bowls of water. Presidents are often given animals as gifts. In 1863, a friend sent President Abraham Lincoln a live turkey. It was intended to be the meal at a holiday dinner. But President Lincoln's 10-year-old son, Tad, became fond of the turkey. Tad named him Jack and begged his father to let the turkey live. Lincoln agreed, and Tad got to keep Jack as a pet. Another wild pet lived in the White House with President John Quincy Adams. In 1826, a French war hero named Marquis de Lafayette came to visit and brought an alligator with him. According to one story, the alligator lived in the East Room of the White House for 2 whole months. Then Lafayette left, and he took the alligator with him. Luckily, President Adams and his wife still had their pet silkworms to keep them company. Watching them spin silk for the First Lady's dresses was not quite as exciting as an alligator, but certainly a lot safer. The King of Siam, now called Thailand, gave President James Buchanan 2 elephants. It seems Buchanan quickly decided the White House wasn't the best home for them because he sent them to live at the zoo. Some first families were such animal lovers that they nearly had their own zoo at the White House. President John F. Kennedy had more than 20 pets. Calvin Coolidge had about 25, and President Theodore Roosevelt had more than 40. During these presidencies, you may have wondered who was in charge of the White House, the people or the animals. President John F. Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy each had many pets growing up, so they surrounded their own young children, Caroline and John Jr., with pets in the White House. Here's a picture of them with their many dogs. The family arrived at the White House in 1961 with a dog named Charlie, but before long the canine pack had grown to 5. There was also a cat named Tom Kitten, but the president was allergic to him, so Tom had to go live with Mrs. Kennedy's secretary. For a short time, the family kept ducks on the White House lawn, but Charlie was always trying to catch one, and when the ducks started eating the tulips, the Kennedys found another home for them, too. 2 deer replaced the ducks, until Mrs. Kennedy was warned that although deer seemed gentle, they weren't good pets for children. So off the deer went to the Tisch Children's Zoo at Central Park in New York City. Plenty of other animals were there to stay, though. There were 5 horses, including Caroline's pony, Macaroni. The pony got thousands of fan letters from people all around the country. Caroline also took care of the family's parakeets, Maybelle and Bluebell. There were at least 2 hamsters, a rabbit named Zaza, who could play a few notes on a toy horn, and more. President Theodore Roosevelt had more than 40 pets while living in the White House. Actually, many of them belonged to his 6 children, but the president loved having the animals around as much as his kids did. There was Ted's macaw, Archie's pony, guinea pigs, a badger, a one-legged rooster, a pig, a raccoon, cats, dogs, and rats. There was also a lion, a hyena, a zebra, and bears, but these were sent to live at the family's summer house in Long Island, New York. Algonquin, a pony, was especially loved by the Roosevelt children. One day, when little Archie Roosevelt was sick in bed, his 5-year-old brother, Quentin, decided to cheer him up. Quentin took Algonquin on a ride in the White House elevator to visit Archie. A new pet unexpectedly joined the Roosevelt family in 1903. While the president was visiting Kansas by train, a little girl offered the president a baby badger. President Roosevelt couldn't resist. His kids had many pets, but not a badger. He thanked the girl and gave her a tour of the presidential train car. Later on his train trip, he wrote a letter to his children about the pet badger he was bringing home with him. Snakes were also popular in Roosevelt's White House. Alice, a very wild child, had a snake named Emily Spinach. Some stories say that Alice often kept the snake around her neck or in her purse, just to shock people. Quentin was also fond of snakes. Once, when the president was in an important meeting, Quentin roller skated into the Oval Office. He had 3 snakes twined around his arms. At first, the men thought the snakes were toys, until they got a little closer. The visitors got a huge shock, while the president got a big laugh. With so many pets and so many children, there was hardly ever a dull moment while the Roosevelts lived in the White House. Calvin Coolidge had a large collection of pets. Most of the wild ones were sent as gifts: a bear from Mexico, a small hippo from South Africa, and a wallaby from Australia. As much as they loved animals, the president and the first lady sent most of their wild pets to live at the zoo. But one wild critter, a raccoon, won the heart of President Coolidge and found a home in the White House for a short time. The Coolidges named the raccoon Rebecca and built her a special house in one of the big trees on the White House grounds. Outside, they kept her leashed. Inside, Rebecca could roam freely about the White House. She loved to take long baths with a bar of soap as a bath toy. First, Lady Grace Coolidge fed Rebecca shrimp and persimmon. President Coolidge took Rebecca on evening walks. Some people who worked in the White House did not like Rebecca as much as the Coolidges. That was because she dug up houseplants, unscrewed light bulbs, and tore at clothing. But the Coolidges loved Rebecca so much that they took her on their summer vacation. President Coolidge thought dogs were a must. He said, "Any man who does not like dogs does not deserve to be in the White House." Many dogs spent time in the Coolidge White House, but the president's favorite was a snowy white collie named Rob Roy. He slept in the president's bedroom and went with him to the Oval Office. Rob Roy appears with the First Lady in a painting that still hangs in the White House. Rob Roy had to sit still for a very long time as the artist painted his portrait. To keep the frisky dog from moving, Mrs. Coolidge fed him candy. The end.